Welcome to the world of small and medium hydroelectricity. Very old human technology. It is still very relevant today, and in my opinion, the cleanest, most reliable, and most productive way of producing good green electricity. My name is Wright. I am the manager of this operation here that has generated electricity continuously since April of 1897. So that's going on 124 years. And I want to introduce you to the operation, and then I want to talk to you about green electricity and this way of generating it, and the problems that we have today, which are entirely political. And I would like to discuss these at a time when we're approaching a provincial election coming up. So that's only a week away, and I want this message to go out to as many people as possible. So here we have our operation. It's family owned, and it's at one time was for the servicing of the mines and the mills at Sandon, British Columbia, an old mining community. Mining abandoned our community about 25 years ago, and the only thing produced here today is great green hydroelectricity in this powerhouse. So we take a small amount of water out of some of the creeks that are up in the high mountains here. We drop it a very great distance, so we don't use a lot of water. Extremely efficient way of producing power. We produce more kilowatts per unit of water than almost any other plant. And I want to take you over here and show you the water coming out of the plant as it returns to the river again. So we're going to look over the tail race here, and you can see it's quite a small amount of water. There it returns to the river, where it continues to make its way to the ocean. Now we're going to go inside the generating station so you can have a look at this beautiful plant. It's a record-setting plant in terms of longevity, and you're going to have a quick tour of this, and then I want to have a discussion with you about power and power politics and things that we need to deal with that are of interest to all the political parties. I want to also mention at this point, I'm not a very political guy. I don't have any affiliation with any particular party. I'm not in favor of sort of blind loyalty to a party regardless of what goes on. I'm far more interested in the integrity of the people and hearing the truth and what their policies and platforms are. That's how I would be deciding where I vote. I think democracy is extremely important. I believe in voting, and I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to vote in a way that is meaningful and is based on what they're told. I don't like hollow promises. I don't like being lied to, and really that's where it's at for me. I have a request from both the Liberal candidate and the Green Party candidate to talk about our operation and the problems that we face in the current political world. And so that's the purpose of this video, is to inform you and allow you to ask questions and make your own choices. So really, if democracy is going to work in our favor, all of us need to have choices, and we need to have accurate and reliable, honest information so that we can do those things. If we simply have a government monopoly that's telling us what we're going to do and we aren't allowed to be part of that conversation, that kind of sounds to me like more you'd expect in a place like Russia, where the state makes the decisions for us, not us. Come on in. It's always done. This is the creation of Nikola Tesla, built by Westinghouse built turbine, designed and built in San Francisco. It's one of the few non-Canadian components in this generating station. And on this side here, you'll see some good Edison technology. So all of the greats in electrical history are well represented here in this powerhouse, and we get international visitors from everywhere that come to see not only something that's extremely historic, but something that's very efficient and relevant in today's terms as well. So this is definitely our country's longest continuously operating generating facility. Walk around the end of the shaft. Look at the precision and beautiful craftsmanship in these big bearings. Bearings are still original after more than a century of operation. And around from the mining days when they used to compress air here as well. Also built in Canada, see? And here you see the beautiful alternating current generator from the other side, and right down to the turbine. Here's where the water comes in to the turbine. We use pressure much more than we use volume to create the power. So today this generating station produces power for the region and the neighboring towns. Here you can see all the original instruments and controls. Tesla was the designer of this technology, and you see circuit breakers and various things. These are still in service after a lifetime's worth of work here. And then you can see over here we have some of the most sophisticated modern equipment for monitoring our power quality and the operation, recording data, and triggering alarms of anything that we would need to know about from a maintenance perspective. And in the far end you can see some of the standby generation equipment. So that's our beautiful operation, and I want to take you to a quieter place now where I don't have to compete for noise above the turbine and the generator, and we can talk about electricity in British Columbia and the problems we face that are political and where we need to go. So welcome to my home. It's easier to talk here without the noise of the powerhouse in the background. And I wanted to say that this has been a lifetime's work for me. My first association with this power station was 48 plus years ago, and in the early 1990s, when the mining was ended here, the generating station and all of the infrastructure here was threatened with demolition. It wasn't seen to be useful anymore, and my family got involved in forming the current company. Really enthused by, first of all, the advice and enthusiasm of Larry Bell, who had been chairman of BC Hydro in the 1980s, and he had been really encouraging about the importance of getting this generating station tied to the grid, something that had never been done in all of its history. It was always independent before, and he saw it as both worthwhile to preserve a tremendous historical asset, but also a very efficient power plant, and he could see that this was in many ways the model of the future for British Columbia, as well as the model of the past. And the federal government was beginning to produce an eco-branding program, and the green energy was becoming a household word, and so it seemed like the perfect fit. We had a lot of challenges ahead of us, one of which was to get tied to the grid, which was quite a distance away. and we had to rehabilitate the old wooden penstocks that supply the water to the generating station. They were getting into a very deteriorated state. So we had a lot of hard work and a lot of money to put into this in order to do it, but it seemed like a very worthwhile thing. The federal government started the program. It was part of the Ecologo program, and the certification for a hydroelectric plant was quite, the process was stringent. And one of the things that is very important to note is the green definition is a legal definition, and one of the things that it does not include is water or hydroelectric facilities that store water behind dams. That disqualifies it, and it can't comply for green. This was annoying to the BC politicians at the time, who just made the assumption that because they're using a renewable resource like water, that it was going to be automatically introduced into the green program. And British Columbia produces about 97% of its electricity by water, almost all of which, by the way, is behind storage dams. So they just thought it would be an automatic thing, and that they were going to reap the highest prices and be first in line for power distribution based on the green merits. But it doesn't work that way. So the amount of power in British Columbia that is, the amount of hydropower that's actually capable of being deemed green is very small at present, actually much less than it was even in the 1950s or before. And surprisingly, BC is ideal for this kind of generation. So if you look at New Zealand or Scandinavia or progressive places in the world, the small, environmentally friendly hydro is very much in demand, and they do great things with it. But not so here. So anyway, the federal government program didn't work for the people here, the politicians that thought that big hydro was the only thing. And as a result, there was a lot of dissension between the federal initiatives and the province, and BC has backpedaled and bailed out of the green program entirely. In fact, eliminating the green tariffs a few years ago, and in British Columbia right now, it isn't really possible for a green producer to sell into a green market. Well, back when my family became involved in this operation, it seemed like all of these things were going to progress ahead, and we look forward to a day when green electricity would be the most highly sought after form of electricity, and that we would see the higher prices, higher than the polluting sources of power. Sadly, today in BC, it's exactly backwards. So we get the lowest prices, and in British Columbia right now, coal-generated power is being imported because it's cheap, and our green hydro is meaningless here, and we cannot transmit it to a market that does accept green. So I was astounded the other night listening to the debate of the various different provincial parties in the election, and I heard John Horgan make a mention of Site C being clean and green, and it was astounding to me to hear that our provincial leader doesn't apparently know the difference between green and non-green, and either that or maybe I would hate to think that he considers us all too stupid to understand the difference. But what he, I'm sure, understands is the difference between organic produce and non-organic produce. It's a process. It's an evaluation process. There's definitions. You can't just say it's organic if it isn't. And yet that's what our leader is saying in respect to our electricity. And I hear this all the time. Politicians and probably the general public and the media that simply don't understand the difference. So in British Columbia, our green hydroelectricity is barely touched. There is incredible potential in this province for a very, very clean and renewable export industry, not to mention that we should be entirely powered here domestically by green electricity. That is something that is doable, and it would seem to be very important in the future. Big hydro can come into play with this picture. It's good to have its reliability to back us up. Water can be stored for using for making up the difference in energy, for example, where you have intermittents like solar and wind. During the times when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, stored water can be used, and that is an arguably useful thing. But small and medium-sized hydroelectricity is tremendously efficient. It's steady. It's 24 hours a day, and it's really hard to get any better than that. Anyway, I've made some notes here that I want to follow just so that I don't wander too much. So we've talked about the problems facing this form of electricity generation, and as I mentioned earlier, the problems are almost entirely political. British Columbia is ideally situated, and we have the climate and so forth to do this in a very productive way. Sad that we have barely touched it. And in terms of electricity policy, it's been going backwards in recent years, and we are going to be the laughing stock of the world if we don't do something intelligent here soon. One of the things that I would like to point out is that monopolies are very destructive to intelligent management of our resources, and I think most economists would agree with me that monopolies are harmful, and we should be doing our best to protect ourselves from that. It's good to have everybody involved and to have things being done locally as well as provincially and federally. Monopolies in the corporate world are harmful, except if you happen to be the monopoly, but generally are harmful. And I think even worse than that are government owned monopolies. And the reason I say that is it's like the wolf guarding the hen house. If there's no will there to provide fair and equal opportunities and allow citizens, whether you're small, big, rich, poor, whatever, to get involved, these monopolies are harmful. And I think that we've seen a lot of questions raised about things like ICBC and BC Hydro, questions that need to be asked. And if you look at a country like New Zealand that has been very progressive with electricity policy and achieved so many good goals, including the environmental goals, it has been because their focus has been on preventing these resources to be monopolized. So if you're in New Zealand, you can the consumer has choices, many choices. If you want your power from a co-op, you can get it from a co-op. Or if you want it from a private generator or a county-owned facility, you've got those choices, and you can pick who you want to deliver it to your home as well. And so there aren't the gates that we have here in our country due to the monopoly. So last provincial election, I took the time to talk to all the different parties and try to get electricity policy on the table. And there was certainly interest from everybody at the time. And I met with them all. The current government, when I talked to them when they were in the opposition, I went to Vancouver and met with a number of their key representatives. And there were a lot of promises made that have never been carried through. And it's been very disappointing to me, because one of the things that I was seeking for was open dialogue and discussion and trying to build and improve electricity policies in British Columbia. What I was told would happen is an entirely different story than what has happened, And I can tell you that I'm extremely disappointed that the current government has made virtually every attempt they could to block me and my business and my type of power generation out of the discussion. So, for example, the last minister, actually the Minister of Energy before the current one, when she was given her posting, I immediately asked for the first available meeting date so that we could talk about these things. Now, of course, when they had been in the opposition, they had asked me about standing on advisory committees and working on electricity policy and so forth, which I am very happy to do. But I was completely cut out of the conversation. And in over 2 years of trying to arrange to have a meeting with the previous minister, it never happened. It was always denied that opportunity. In fact, at one point, I was told by an assistant that the reason that she would not meet with me is because I wasn't in her constituency, which I just found to be an incredibly evasive answer, considering that, first of all, her constituency is less than 2 hours away from here. We are the oldest electricity producer in the province, and we were the first in Western Canada to get federal green certification. That, I would think, would put us in the constituency of the Minister of Energy. At any rate, she was determined to not communicate with us, and we were never able to have any discussions, despite the fact that the electricity regulation in British Columbia is a mess. The current Minister of Energy, when he was appointed after the shuffle, same thing. We've been requesting meetings with him, and we don't even get the courtesy of a response. So that's the sad thing. I don't think that's democracy in action. Really, I feel like our entire sector has been targeted, and we have no voice. So, is that democracy? I would ask the question. The current government has been very prejudiced in labeling us all bad independent power producers. Now, what does that exactly mean? That just means somebody other than government that's producing power. And an example of an independent power producer is Columbia Power, which is owned by the Columbia Basin Trust. And Columbia Power is presumably a publicly owned body as well, but nonetheless, they're not part of BC Hydro, although obviously politically linked. But it's interesting to note that the current government commissioned a report a few months ago, and it was titled Zapped, and it's worth checking out, although I doubt very few people have read the full 80 pages of it. The government cherry-picked out pieces of it that they thought might be advantageous to their campaign, and this was communicated to the media. That's where I first heard about it. But the current government's attempt to tarnish independent power producers, it doesn't align with this report at all. So one of the things that the Zapped report indicated was that the worst business case scenario is the Columbia Power project at the Juanita expansion, and in fact it really panned it. But that's not a big bad private corporation or a small family operation like ours. That's a government to government thing, and similarly it was very critical of a lot of what would seem to be lucrative power projects or power contracts that were given to independent private corporations in the previous government, and probably the most notable of those is actually owned by a fossil fuel company from Alberta. And certainly I would like to ask the questions as to why the rate that they're receiving would appear to be 9 times what our plant gets, and their power isn't steady or as green as ours, but we are really on the low end of the power scale. So just to give you a concept of where we're at, this month we are getting 2 cents a kilowatt hour from PowerX, and I want to talk about PowerX in a minute or two. The price that you're probably paying BC Hydro on Tier 1 is around 10 cents, and Tier 2 about 13 cents. So how is it that there's such a big spread in the pricing? And considering that we are producing green electricity, which most consumers aren't privileged enough in British Columbia to be able to use. So yes, I think there's legitimate criticism for why these private power contracts were given rates would appear to be all over the map and in secrecy. So the government has defended not discussing these contracts by saying that they are privileged and they're between private companies and so on and so forth. However, in the ZAPT report, they're talking about 2 government entities and the dealings that go on between those. And I'm thinking that probably you agree with me in the sense that we should know what's going on in our publicly owned corporations and in the government. Isn't that transparency in the way it's supposed to be? So I thought, well, that's interesting. This is a very bad case business scenario, and yet I'm getting the fallout of the criticism from that for our company if we're deemed to be a big bad independent power producer. So I did an FOI search on the Juanita expansion project, and all I got back was a volume of entirely redacted information that was meaningless. So I wanted to know, what is the deal that's been struck between BC Hydro and Columbia Power? But I was not given the privilege of knowing that, and I think that people should be demanding that kind of clarity and information from our government. It seems to me to be rather crooked to be withholding that information, and of course I'm very suspect as to why. I would just like to see that we receive a fair price for our high quality power, and that's all I'm asking for. I know that if we produce power for BC Hydro needs to make a profit from that, and so should they. And the British Columbia Utilities Commission has a policy of allowing a 15% per annum profit over cost for any utility. However, British Columbia government has often exempted BC Hydro from regulation. Would appear to be when it's convenient. This was first done under Glenn Clark's government, and it's been used by successive governments since then. BC Hydro doesn't have to comply with the same rules that the other players do, and so for me, when I see our company getting 2 cents a kilowatt hour, by the way, that's on a good month, and you are paying 6 times that for the same power, there's something radically wrong with that. According to the Competition Bureau in Ottawa, it's highly illegal. You cannot take advantage of a stranded producer and mark a product up by hundreds of percent. That's just not fair, and it's unethical. So we have to look at the way that the power is being bought and sold in this province, and one of the things that has been going on for years is a company known as PowerX, which is 100% owned by BC Hydro, and yet it's deemed to be a private corporation. So how does that work? What it means is that the so-called private corporation is not subject to freedom of information laws, and therefore you and I cannot scrutinize what's going on in that entity. So why would we even need that in a provincially owned utility? Well, I have a hard time to really understand what the difference is between that way of doing business and money laundering in its sort of typically known sense, which might be casinos or underworld drug trade or whatever. Money laundering, in my opinion, is where you have money that is being obtained unfairly or illegitimately, and it's laundered by allowing it to go through a third party hand so that it cannot be tracked. So is this what's going on in our government-owned monopoly utility in BC? So for example, for many years we have had only the option to sell power to PowerX. And when we sell our power to PowerX, we have no idea ahead of time what the prices are going to be. We have no idea whether they're even real. We don't know where our power goes. We don't know what happens to carbon credits, and that's the problem, and we cannot find out. So why wouldn't the government just be straight up about it and say, okay, you know, this is what we are going to do with your electricity, this is where it goes, and adhere to the 15% markup that would be allowed by British Columbia Utilities Commission in normal circumstances. That would seem to be a fair way to do it, but no, we can't track anything, and if you try to do an FOI search on PowerX, you'll get nowhere. These are kind of questions that I really want to be asking the government, and I want to be asking the candidates for the next government. There's a lot of things that go on in the electricity sector that the public knows little about, and the media doesn't seem to understand, and we need to learn about this if we're going to be able to move into the future in a healthy way in British Columbia. So we're talking about manipulating power prices, characterizing our kinds of respectable businesses as evil. That just, to me, smacks of stereotyping and discrimination. And for why? Why would it be in the interest of the British Columbia government to try and stunt the growth of what could be our greatest and cleanest resource for both domestic use and for export? One of the things that hampers our ability to export clean green electricity in British Columbia is the lack of transmission capacity outside of the province, and I'm talking about to the prairie provinces and east, and also down into the United States. We currently have very limited capacity to move electricity, and that's often been used as an excuse for why we cannot take our green electricity and, for example, sell it to Calgary Transit, which is something they dearly wanted to do for years, but we were never able to. We were blocked at every turn, and so we're told that there's insufficient transmission capacity, that even the power from Site C is, for example, going to be virtually worthless if we cannot send it to markets. Now, Alberta would love to have clean electricity in place of coal, and that's been one of the Alberta government's objectives, and so their difficulty there is, where do you obtain it from? Well, BC could be producing it in abundance, and we aren't. But it would make a lot of sense for us to have some good transmission lines to send our power out of the province. That'd be great revenue from for a province that's always relied on exports. And as much as Alberta has a need to get its oil out of its province and to market, we should be thinking about the same. Why was that not put on the table during the pipeline discussions, for example? It's not because the current government didn't know about it, because I made a point of actually contacting the Premier's office and saying, why isn't this on the table? There just isn't a will there to do it. So that's impediment number one. I've often wondered whether the money that's being blown up at Site C would be a lot better off put into building some proper transmission infrastructure. The current government has been trying to dismantle the programs that are in place for ordinary citizens to participate in, particularly the net metering program, which was designed for ordinary citizens to be able to participate in some meaningful action about climate change. And so whether it would be that you wanted to put some solar panels on your home and hopefully be able to either receive a credit or even perhaps make a little bit of money on supplying green electricity into the grid, that program has been under attack. The current government has gutted it, and the people that have invested in net metering projects are in risk of losing that investment. The target is to drop the net metering prices down to about 3.5 cents within the next couple of years, and that's just horrible. So why would people producing good green electricity be expected to take a third of what that power is worth? That just doesn't make sense, and we are a long way away from achieving a green standard in our electricity in British Columbia. We are not even, we've hardly touched it. So I know a lot of people are quite incensed by that. I think one of the things that we could learn a lot from New Zealand, for example, is all about the proper use of our electricity grid, how it could be beneficial to solving climate change, how it could be beneficial to our economy. And one of the things New Zealand has done is made it illegal for controllers of power generation to also control power transmission. They have to be entirely separate entities, and it makes perfectly good sense, because you can have a great publicly owned asset like the British Columbia electricity transmission grid, which instead of working as an economic facilitator and something that would facilitate environmental improvements, it's used as a blocker or as a gate. So let me use this analogy. Let's just say that well, first of all, let's recognize that our electricity grid here, that BC Hydro owns the majority of it, that's a publicly funded, paid for highway network for electricity. That's how our electrons move from where they're produced to where they want to go. And our highway system is much the same. We expect everybody in this province to have equal access to our highways, and it's meant to stimulate growth and provide flexibility of movement and so forth. So with our highway, if you wanted to use a comparable example, let's just say that the government decided today that they were going to restrict who can utilize our public highway. And let's say that the minister decided that maybe only people that drive Datsuns are going to be able to access our highway, and that everybody else is out of luck. Well, there'd be a revolt, and people would say it's preposterous and unfair, and of course that would be the truth. And yet that's exactly what is going on with our electricity highway, with our grid in this province today. So that if you happen to be a certified green producer in British Columbia and you want to sell your product to a sawmill somewhere that wants to provide a green certified product, or if you wanted to sell it to the City of Calgary Transit like we had the opportunity to do, but we're never able to, we should have equal access to that and pay, of course, what it's worth, the same as we do with on our actual highways with gas tax and other forms of taxation.
that's not what happens. The grid here is used. It's kind of like the troll that guards the bridge. They pick and choose who they want to be able to access or provide access to that, and as a result, those of us that aren't in the privileged class, we don't get to use it. So we are forced to sell our great electricity for below the cost of production. As nobody in the world can produce power for 2 cents a kilowatt hour, no matter how polluting or dirty the technologies are. Why are we selling our beautiful power at those kinds of prices? And why is this being allowed? It's a question that I've been constantly asking politicians for the last few years, and I'm not getting decent answers to that. And I would ask the parties that are running right now, and I would like to challenge the current government to finally behaving with some kind of fairness in this situation. This is simply abominable, and it is not helping the transition to a better environment and to addressing climate change. And I heard in the debate the other night too, the provincial leaders debate, our premier talking about wanting to listen to people. And I think that is the essence of democracy, that all of our leaders need to be listening to all of us and respecting our opinions and being able to make good decisions based on science and common sense. But when I hear my premier talking about how important it is for them to listen to us, I'm asking the question, why aren't they listening to us? We have been blocked out of this conversation in a very dictatorial way, and it's shameful, and I am speaking out about it. I am incensed and disappointed. When I was a child, Tommy Douglas was a regular guest at my family's home, and I admired Tommy Douglas a lot, and it left a great impression on me. He was a great Canadian, and he was the foundation of the NDP from its CCF days. And one of the things that I really respected about Tommy Douglas was that he was a good listener. And he even listened to the opinions of a young child like me, who was interested in on all kinds of things that are of importance to our country. I don't see that happening anymore, and I think he would be gravely disappointed at where it's gone from there. I don't like the fact that I don't have a voice with the current government, and I find it that very, very disrespectful and crass, and just as much as I don't like being deceived or lied to, I look at the way that the Site C issue was handled by the previous government and this government, and I think that the previous government had its strategies and agendas, a lot of which I didn't agree with, but at any rate, at least they were straight up about it. I mean, they were pro Site C, and I think a lot of people voted for the current government based on the idea that Site C was deemed to be a bad investment, and that it came at a great cost environmentally and economically. A lot of prominent people have spoken out in a very intelligent, respectful way about the merits and the pros and cons about the Site C project. And I think that a lot of people voted for the current government based on the idea that they were going to change that. And so I think sometimes it's better to know the devil than the devil that we don't know. And anyways, that's so. I'm getting close to the end of our discussion here. I've covered a lot of ground, and I'm hoping that it's not too much but I really wanted to see these discussions happen long before the government changed again, and I really hope that all of you that care about our province and energy picture into the future are willing to stop and think about this. And when you vote, I hope that you will demand answers from people on these important topics, because right now British Columbia is the laughing stock of the progressive world when it comes to electricity policy, and what a shame in a place that has such tremendous potential. And it really bothers and hurts me that our family lives in poverty, doing a very respectful operation. We produce a lot of valuable power here, but we sure don't see that value here. In fact, it's not even enough for us to cover our basic taxes and costs, let alone be able to make a living at it. So I have to answer to my children, my grandchildren, and they just say, you know, my children, when I've asked them about carrying on after my 50 years of involvement here, they just say, no, Dad, you know, you and Mom worked so hard for all these years, and we can't do that. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be living on the verge of bankruptcy all the time. It just doesn't work, and it's a great worry to me about this operation and whether it's going to carry on. The last 2 years, we have seen virtually all of the small green hydro operations shut down. Contracts terminated by BC Hydro, and no will to continue. One that's very local to us here. In the end, I think they were receiving about 8.5 cents or so from BC Hydro on a 20-year contract, which they performed beautifully. And upon the 20th anniversary of the contract, it was not renewed, and these people are devastated. They have nothing after that, and what a crying shame. Now, BC Hydro is receiving power for 8.5 cents from a producer and selling it to you at 13.5 cents. Is that not a reasonable level of profit? Why would we be shutting down certifiable green electricity producers at a time when we need to be building that capacity as fast as we possibly can? And it's time to quit pretending that BC is clean and green, and when I hear John Horgan say that, I think it's very disrespectful. There is very little that's clean and green about the way that power is generated in British Columbia right now, and that needs to change. And thank you for listening to me, and please come and tour our operation. I'm very happy to discuss this, whether it's on committees or for communities. If you want these discussions, please call me. I would love to talk to you about it more. Thank you.